have you or someone you know experienced the effects of the loneliness epidemic?
During the pandemic, I felt incredibly lonely, and it was very difficult because as therapists, we work, within our silos, and so we already have a very lonely field. But on top of that, um, it was very difficult to not have your community to turn to because everybody was really, staying home.
Even as somebody who is an expert in helping people work through emotions, was experiencing loneliness, especially during the time of the pandemic. Now, this is something that we can all relate to. Everybody watching this, everybody listening to this had some feeling of loneliness or isolation during the pandemic. And I was somebody who was a little bit lucky in that regard because I had my wife and I had my kids and then at the same time, my brother-in-law was out on the road during the pandemic, like going to different events for car shows. And obviously all of those shut down. So he was kind of a nomad at the time and ended up just moving back in with us. So I actually was surrounded by quite a few people who I loved and cared about during the pandemic and was lucky in that regard. But there's a lot of people out there who experienced this on a crazy scale, especially if you were in New York City or LA or San Francisco or some of these areas that were just locked down, and you didn't have any of that and you're single and you're in your apartment and everybody's isolated and you can't go out and restaurants aren't open and there's nothing to do. This was a really trying time in the broader landscape and culture. It was an accelerant to the loneliness epidemic that we're all feeling now. It was already bad pre-pandemic. It's been only getting increasingly worse since the 1970s, since we've really started measuring, since UCLA came up with like a standard measurement of how to measure loneliness. It's only been getting worse since then. But social media and the pandemic are two things that were just like pouring gas on a fire. And I think it's just useful to hear that somebody, even like Dr. Judith, who is an extremely well-connected person, who's doing a lot of good in the world, who is really well-connected to a lot of really great people, a lot of really smart people, intelligent people, even someone like her who traveled throughout Europe when she was studying in college. Even someone like her still felt the effects of the pandemic, still felt the loneliness epidemic hitting her during these certain times. So you're not alone. You're not alone. There's so many other people that are feeling all the same feelings that you're feeling.